Good afternoon and welcome to Tetewathá, Partyline Talk Show. I'm your host, Lance Stacy, and today I am joined by representatives of the Kahnawake Environment Protection Office. I'm joined by Lynn Jacobs and Patrick Ragaz, and we're going to talk about the Recreation Bay Restoration Project, I believe. Did I get it correct? I want to make sure I had every word correct. It's really exciting because it's going to be starting in the fall of 2019, and it seems like we've been talking about this project a very long time, correct, Lynn?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think we've been on the radio a number of times over the years talking about this project, talking about the different problems that exist in the Bay and the studies that we were doing, but we're just so excited now because we're finally able to talk about implementation. We've managed to secure funding and we're there. We're finally there.
So I guess when we're talking about this, what does it mean? Like, what does the project entail and how big is this thing going to be?
Well, first is to take it back a little bit. As I believe most people in the community know, the area originally consisted of multiple small islands. And when the seaway was constructed back in the 1950s, they took the material from the excavation and they put it on the island, in between the islands that existed there, to create the one big island that we have today, Tekakwitha Island. And so throughout the years, that created a number of problems. Maybe about just over 10 years ago, people started to call us and say, our boats are getting stuck in the mud, there are weeds everywhere, we don't see turtles anymore. So we started to notice that there was deterioration happening in the bay. The flow wasn't as fast as it could be in order to move the water and sediment through the bay. So we started to study the problem, and we started to look at what's happening on the shoreline, what's happening in the water, what are how the habitats have changed throughout time, and then we started to model, well, what kind of solutions can we come up with? So the thing is, a lot of people said, well, just go in there with a machine and dig it up, and that's it's simple. It's a simple solution. However, that can produce a lot of environmental damages, environmental impacts from that. So we wanted to look at something that not only had minimized the environmental damages from the solution, but also something that's long-term. You can go in there and you can dig it up, but then maybe in a year or two you may have to do it again if you don't do it properly. So all of these years, yes, it was long, and we agree it was very long to actually come to a place where we had a solution that everybody was comfortable with, that minimized environmental damages, creates a beautiful space for the community, and makes a lot of additional improvements on top of that.
Because I was just thinking a couple of times during summers a few years back, it actually looked like you could actually walk across from some parts along the walking path to the other side. That's how low the water was. I don't know if you could, but it just looked like you could, and that was kind of scary. And I remember when the Elders Lodge was being built, there was a concern, about the turtles at the time, because that place was full of turtles years ago, and then, gone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the habitat's definitely been changing throughout time. So I think we're going to see, when we get into some of the details of what we're actually going to do there, there's a lot of really amazing improvements for people and for the environment, so including turtles.
Because I'm wondering, and I have a question from a listener, so we may as well ask this. Can you ask what will happen to the beavers that have created homes along the island and the shore? Because I think it's more than just the fish and the turtles. Like, there's other animals that have made homes. I mean, you have geese, you have ducks, you have, if you go closer along Onage, there's a lot going on there. Go ahead, Patrick. I know you've been dying to get in this.
I'll jump in. Certainly with respect to the beavers, in general, the project has been designed and will be implemented with environmental considerations in mind. So, the intent, and I think we'll get into some of those details later, but nothing that we're doing would sort of impact the beavers either way. I know there's maybe mixed feelings about beavers in particular, but that's for another discussion. Certainly the project that we're doing looks to enhance the environment in the area while also making it more usable for the community.
Okay. Well, and will that help with the water flow? Because that seems to be the top of thing that's of issue here.
Right. So one of the, studies that we undertook over the last 10-year period was a flow modeling exercise. So basically, we monitored for 2 1-month periods the flows that were actually going through the bay and in the larger regional area. And then once we had a model that we could use, we did a bunch of different tests to see what would improve the flow the most. So would it be dredging all the sediment out of the entire bay, or is it creating a channel of a certain width in the bay? We looked at, multiple outlets into the seaway. So a whole bunch of different options were identified, and the 3 that worked best were dredging, sort of just in that area you were speaking about, near Turtle Bay.
Yeah.
So dredging a channel of about 400 meters long by 40 meters wide in that section, removing the aquatic plants in a portion of the bay, a similar size, and then also increasing the flow in the seaway. So that's actually something we're working on with the Seaway Authority to see how much we can increase those flows as well. So those 3 options are the ones that are going to move the most sediment through the bay and increase the flows the best. So those were what was targeted for the detailed work.
Because I'm glad you said that, because that was always been one of my questions, how the water flows in the seaway and the impact it has on that channel. I'll call it a channel because I don't know what else you would call it, but it would seem to me a lot of that is caused by that.
For sure. So part of the, it is an artificial system that was created when the seaway was constructed. And so that's always going to be a challenge that we have, because right now the flow is basically controlled by the lock down at St. Catherine. And the amount of flow they let out there, it's basically everything that's moving through that system. And because the seaway is so deep, a lot of the flow is going through the seaway and is sort of bypassing the bay altogether. However, if we are able to increase the flows in the seaway, that is going to pull some more water through the bay as well. So that is one of the aspects.
Because I always remember as a kid in that area of the Johnson's Beach area that, you could used to see a little bit of a current. And as the years went by, it was less and less and less. It was more like standstill water. It moved, but it looked, in
as
comparison.
It's been filling.
Yeah.
It's as throughout the years, as more and more sediment has been accumulating, for sure, the whole system has changed in a lot of respects. I mean, the last few years we've had really high water levels, so it's been a bit unusual than previous years, but it's very impacted in most years where the water levels are, like you mentioned at the beginning, Luann, where you can almost
walk across, you could see it.
And it's almost turning into just a wetland environment instead of a flowing sort of bay environment. So that's the repairs that we're going to be doing to the bay so that we can ensure continued use and enjoyment of the community.
All right. On that note, we'll take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talk Show. I'm your host, Lynn Stacy, and today we're speaking with staff members and coordinators and et cetera, from Kahnawake Environment Protection Office. We're speaking with Lynn Jacobs and Patrick Ragaz, and we're talking about the Recreation Bay Restoration Project. So while we were at commercial, I got a comment from a listener. It said, cut a hole in the north wall the river will help pull the water out and help it flow. So I don't know. I've heard that before. I just don't understand what that means. So I don't know. I'm
Right.
sure you've heard this before.
Yeah, so, the idea there is that if we eliminated that portion of the north wall, the flow in the river would then just pull more water through the bay. So we did actually investigate that, both through speaking to the Seaway Authority and also actually going out on site and doing some investigating. And the issue is that the water in the river at that location is actually lower than it is in the seaway.
Oh.
So the reason that wall is there is to have more water depth in the seaway itself, and that helps with the draft that the ships need to pass through. So if we were to cut a hole at that location, basically what would happen is the water level in the bay itself would lower So, I mean, obviously that's not something we would want because we're trying to have as much water in the bay as we can. In addition to that, obviously it would impact the ability for ships to pass through. So the Seaway Authority itself is certainly not interested in helping us with that option.
Okay. So let's walk through some of the things that are going to happen in some of the areas of this particular project.
Sure.
I could go for the general aspects, and then maybe Patrick could give some more details because he's been the project manager over the last few years and has been really in the details. So some of the aspects that we're looking at doing first is establishing a couple of really beautiful natural zones on the island. A turtle basking site and a wetland site to enhance the island and the biodiversity of the island. We do have an interesting ecology on the island. It's rocky. There's some interesting habitats that are there, but it's fairly uniform. So we'd like to diversify that and provide habitat for some other species. So those are some of the things that we're looking at doing first, and then following that, there's going to be all the flow improvements, of course. And it's not all going to happen this year. We're going to have some elements this year and some elements next year, and potentially even the year after if we're not able to complete it. But the flow improvements that Patrick mentioned, the dredging, the aquatic plant removals, and then a lot of improvements along the shorelines as well. And then some elements that we were recommended to us through our consultation process that we did, through our open house events that we did in the community. A lot of people were saying we would like to see a beach. So that's another big one that we're looking at. And that wouldn't happen this year because we would like to do a lot more consultation on that and have a lot more discussions, because it does impact a lot of different things in the community and different people and groups. So to have more discussion about that and look at that for next year. So I don't know if we want to go into the details of some.
Sure. Yeah.
Elements.
I mean, I can maybe just jump in on a bit more details. Lynn had mentioned the 2 natural zones that are being constructed this year. And, part of the issue is that when the island was constructed, there wasn't thought to the environment. It was basically we need a place to put the rock and clay that we're pulling out of the river to create the seaway. So it's, basically a riprap wall all along the edge, which is difficult for people to access and also for wildlife. So, animals trying to get between the water and the land have trouble. So creating a couple of natural areas certainly helps with that. And we're also proposing a number of other access points that will facilitate people accessing the water as well as wildlife. So the one natural zone is a turtle nesting zone and wetland area. And essentially it will involve excavating away quite a bit of the material, so that hard rock and riprap, replacing that with some areas of sand that are very suitable for turtles to lay their eggs in. There'll be some wetland habitat created, and then just a series of shrubs and other plants as well. So, we're diversifying both the vegetation that's available, but also what we call the topography, which is, basically the different elevations that are present, because you can really create different microhabitats just by changing the elevations. So one area might be a little bit wetter more of the year, whereas one is dry and on higher land. Right now, as we know, the island is very flat. So there really isn't a lot of variation of what's growing there. So by just varying some of that topography and creating those habitats, we're really going to enhance the opportunities for turtles to reproduce, because we have identified that, yes, there are lots of turtles that use the bay, but they have a challenge finding suitable nesting sites at this point. So often people see turtles digging around the bike path and that, and they're not very successful in those locations just because the base material is really hard and rocky, and so just trying to dig in there is the challenge for the turtles. The second natural zone that we're planning on creating will be located beside the remnant natural island portion that already exists there, so sort of right across from Turtle Bay, but on the island side, just downstream in that area. So that is actually the only portion that remains from the original islands. And so we want to sort of not touch that area, but expand onto the island and create another habitat there. That's going to be sort of a pond habitat, and then a series of wetlands going out from that as well. So that's just going to be creating another area of about 1.5 acres on the island that's going to be more naturalized, some nice wetlands. We're going to be creating a few hills as well in the area and a viewing platform so community members can go there and just observe, the wildlife there. Through that, the bike path will be maintained along there, so it'll be another opportunity to view what's happening in that wetland. So we're excited about those 2 natural zones, and I think
And that will happen this fall.
those are the 2 that are planned to happen this fall. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so there will be disturbances. That's, I think, one of the things that we
yeah.
there will be disturbances that community members will notice with the implementation, the construction that will happen through that process. So we're going to be having somebody on site. We've hired somebody who's going to be on site throughout the whole process from the community, and to make sure that there's always communication back and forth so that the disturbance is minimized.
Okay. Does this kind of work impact the fish? I'm just curious, because with everybody into the fishing right now, and you see some very interesting and very large or very small fish, will this have any impact on that as well?
Right. So, one of the continued issues, part of the background studies that we did were several fish inventories in the bay. And through those inventories, we sort of identified that, yes, it is good fish habitat in the bay. But if we keep going down that road of, more sediment every year, more aquatic and dense aquatic plant growth, eventually that fish habitat is reduced because you end up getting zero oxygen conditions over winter, and then that can lead to fish kills, et cetera, et cetera. So we recognize that we needed to do something to also help the fish populations that are in the bay. So we are taking measures during construction to ensure that fish aren't going to be impacted by the works, but then we're also including elements of the project like fish spawning areas and diversifying the habitat in the wetlands, so that should ultimately benefit them in the long run.
Okay, I had to ask about the fish because people are into the fishing right now, so we know that it's an important thing, but you don't realize when you make one little change how it affects everything else that's in that area, and there's a lot of things happening. I'm not an environmentalist, but I just know, from listening to people and watching different things, that there's a lot of things going on in those areas.
Right. One of the real challenges is that, we have to be very mindful of when fish and other wildlife are undertaking key life cycles, right? So when fish are spawning, we don't want to be working in the water. When the turtles are hibernating, they hibernate in the sediment at the bottom of the river, so we don't want to be digging out sediment when they might potentially be in there. So we have very strict timing windows that we can actually be carrying out some of the different aspects.
And
of the
that's
project.
why some of this is taking place in the fall.
Exactly.
I would think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We had to really time the project based on what we could do when.
Skana se wugwego. Hey, Oscar Delmanyo Dana Asa FM Kahnawake sa Wadahumsade. Welcome. This is Kahnawake's K1037.
You're listening to K1037 Tetewathá. My guests today are from the Kahnawake Environment Protection Office, and I'm speaking with Lynn Jacobs and Patrick Ragaz. We're talking about the recreation restoration project, and I think one of the things that highlights here is how important the timing is about this. So we have 2 parts. So what will happen after that? That's just the fall, and that will be it for now. Or do you continue working on something else during winter months? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, there'll be a significant amount of planning that will happen throughout the winter and spring months before we get back out in the field. It is like you mentioned, there's so many parts to this project, so we really have to make sure that we're doing some very careful planning about what can happen when we have the right people in the field doing the work, and it's being done properly.
So that'll be the first 2 things. Then what's going to happen? What's going to happen with the flow of water? We may as well tackle that big one. That's a big one.
Yeah, so again, that's one of the elements that when you're working in water is always a very sensitive habitat, right? So we can't do the work in the spring because fish are potentially spawning at that time. And then we can't do it too late in the year because, like I mentioned, the turtles will be overwintering. So we have a period from about mid-August to end of September when we can be undertaking that work. So the dredging work itself will take place in 2020 during that window. Then the aquatic plant harvesting.
One question on the dredging.
Sure.
Will that be the whole length of the bay, or?
So
I have to ask.
Yeah, through the surveying work we had done previously, we identified that there was one area that was really deeper
down, right?
than the rest of it, right? And that is near the Turtle Bay area and across to the other natural island. And that's because it widens out there. So it's even slower than the rest of the bay, and a lot of the sediment accumulated there. So that's the area we're going to be focusing on, and we're going to be doing about a 400 meter or say 1,300 feet section in that area. And it's going to be about 40 meters or 130 feet wide throughout that section. So it's substantial, right? We're talking about 5,000 cubic meters or so of sediment that will be removed.
Wow.
And placed on the island. So yeah, I mean, up to about 1.5 feet deep of sediment that's going to be removed.
That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the quantities are big, right? And it's all very, it's not very well consolidated. So we're going to be doing the dredging using a hydraulic suction technique, where you're basically pumping out a slurry of sediment and water. And then that's going to be pumped into dewatering bags on the island. And so all the water will then be filtered out, and you'll end up with the concentrated sediment.
And will you be like researching the sediment? Like, does that have any kind of purpose? This is the scientist in me
well, it really
coming out,
does,
you know?
right? So
yeah.
we did some testing on the quality of the sediment, and it is suitable for use on the island. So, and because of all the it's very high in nutrients, basically, right? You know, all those aquatic plants are using something to grow.
Yeah.
So it is good for topsoil. What we're going to be doing is mixing it with sand so that you get like some air pockets in there as well. And then that sand sediment mix is actually really good topsoil that we're going to be using to enhance the soil on the island.
That's really good because you're reusing, you know, what's within there. You know, it's not just being thrown out. It's not. There's a science too.
It's good
you
for
know?
the environment and also for the project costs as well.
I wasn't thinking project costs. I was thinking environment, but you know which is a good thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Right. And we've been building our pollinator garden out there as well for planting different plants that are good for pollinators, and so that's going to help. You know, that material as well can be helpful to expand that area and have more diversity of species of plants that can survive there.
That's going to be very interesting. What else do we have going on out there? So I could ask you more questions. Come on, Patrick.
So I mentioned the aquatic plant removals. So, you know, we have that 400 meter stretch that's going to be dredged, but then basically from that point all the way down to the outlet of to the seaway, all of that we're going to be doing aquatic plant removal. And that's going to be basically with a boat that's got a cutter on the front of it. We're going to cut those plants, bring them onto the boat, and then we'll be composting those on the island as well. So sort of another, you know,
reusing
way of reusing and fixing up those aquatic plants. So the one issue with the aquatic plants is we know they're going to come back. So that's one element of the project. That's not going to be a one and done. It's going to be something that's going to have to be repeated sort of year after year.
So it would be an annual type thing instead of letting it get too big, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping over time, you know, because when you remove those plants, you remove the nutrients that they've absorbed with them. So hopefully over time, it may become less frequent. But as I mentioned, you know, it still is an artificial system, and artificial systems require some maintenance.
Yeah, because that's what I was trying to think, like, you'll be doing this, but then, you know, what's the next piece because I didn't think it was a once and done.
Yeah,
you know.
For sure.
And I think that's important, being able to reuse a lot of the things that are going to come out of it, you know. Anything else up until this phase?
Yeah, there are other components. So basically, one other major aspect of the project was the shoreline naturalization. So we mentioned the 2 large natural zones that we'll be doing this year, but then there's also a number of smaller elements, I'll call them, that will help, beautify the island, but also create more usable space. So I mentioned access points, where we're basically removing, that hard, rocky, steep slope adjacent to the water and replacing it with, something that's more accessible. So those could become, nice fishing spots and so on. There's going to be a few rest areas that are created just with benches and, nice viewscapes of the bay. There's a number of storm outlets that, collect stormwater from the neighborhoods and that outlets into the bay. So those we're going to be enhancing as well, sort of just naturalizing them into the environment a bit by replacing the concrete blocks on either side of them with sort of living walls. So they'll be held in place with logs, and it'll just sort of naturalize it. And then also creating plunge pools that will allow any sediment that might be mixed in with that stormwater to settle out in a plunge pool, or basically an area just downstream from that
And
can then be
into-
maintained once in a while. So that sediment isn't also contributing to the problems in the bay. What else? I had mentioned a couple of fish spawning sites that we'd be creating. Another thing we'll be doing is formalizing a few fire pit locations on the island as well. As you know, fires are a popular activity on the island, so we're hoping that we can sort of create a few, more formalized areas that will be used. And then there's just, we had done a assessment of all the vegetation along the shoreline as well. So in some cases there's invasive species, in some cases there's a large monoculture of sumac, for example. So we're going to be removing some of those invasive species and just diversifying the number of species present. So we'll be removing some of that sumac as well and just replacing it with a diversity of different plants and shrubs, just to, improve the environment and just make it more visually appealing as well.
That's a lot of work, a lot. We're at our second break, and we'll be right back. Tetewathá Party Line Talk Show. I'm your host, Lynn Stacy, and today we're talking about the Recreation Bay Restoration Project that's going to kick off in the fall of 2019. Actually, now after almost a 10-year wait period, and I'm still shocked that it was 10 years. And I guess I still have some questions. I was thinking about this before coming here, and I guess one of the things is from start to finish, what we talked about different projects in between, and what is going to be the impact on the community use of this area? And I think that's an important piece to this, because people are used to coming and going where people want to come and go. So it's like, what's going to happen? And how long is it going to take? And what should be things that the community be aware of?
I think, those pieces are things that we're still evaluating exactly what's going to happen when. We're in the process of hiring some consultants that are going to be assisting with all of the planning and working with us to make sure that we are taking into consideration, how things will impact the community and how we can minimize those impacts. Because, there will be digging, there will be machinery, we would have to cordon off certain areas at certain times. So we're starting it in the fall, so we can't, right at this point, the summer, there would be no impacts throughout the summer. But for next year, we're going to have to do quite a bit of, talking to Onage, to the marina.
Because that was going to be one of my questions, would
Right.
there be impact there? Especially 2020 is North American Indigenous Games. There's going to be training. They'll, up until I believe it's actually last week, it was 1 year to the date. So I had to ask
Right.
those questions.
Yeah, so we really want to make sure that we understand absolutely every event that is planned in the community during this time, and so that we can not impact those events or try to find a solution, around the dates, because, we are restricted, like Patrick mentioned, to certain dates, right? So there's a lot of complicated factors, but we will be over the winter making sure that we have all those discussions that we need to have so that we minimize those disturbances.
I have another question. I'm just wondering, through all of your studies, is there like a lot of wildlife that is in and around that area that would also be impacted? I'm not talking elephants and giraffes, but, I'm thinking there has to be animals that live in and around. We talked about the beaver, but I'm sure there's other types of wildlife.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one thing that we have to keep in mind as well on the land is the birds. And,
Yes.
Definitely during migration periods are key times for birds passing through, and then also the birds that are nesting there. In terms of this other thing we have to keep in mind in terms of mitigation measures is to not disturb those birds, especially if they're nesting, and then also during the migration periods, because, as we know, migration periods are already very taxing on birds. They have to fly very long distances and everything else.
And we know it's a pit stop for some of the birds. You see in Neuronage tons of geese, baby geese, big geese, ducks, you got everything pretty much there, and people go and visit, and people, like to feed them, which, sometimes is not always good. But, that's, I was just thinking that as we were talking.
So basically every element of the environment had to be considered in this project, and we actually completed an environmental assessment process. And so that helped us develop mitigation measures that we will put in place to ensure that we're not impacting any of this wildlife as the project proceeds. For example, one big concern with dredging always is that you're generating sediment, stirring it up in the water, and then that's going to drift downstream and could settle on spawning areas or whatever.
Yeah.
So we'll have turbidity curtains in place and strategies for doing that dredging, and then continuous environmental monitoring as well while that's happening to make sure that those mitigation measures are actually working. And if they're not, we stop the work and figure out
a different way
need to do. Exactly.
Another question is how long do you expect the work for this to be done? We talked starting in the fall of this year, but how long before you see the complete thing that you're looking to project? 2 years, 3 years?
I mean, the complete thing, so basically this year we're thinking maybe 4 to 6 weeks of work.
Okay.
And then there'll be a break, and then the next phase will start next year. That one will be a little bit longer, maybe 2 to 3 months of actual work in the field. But then, we have to recognize too that when you're planting, you plant sort of smaller shrubs than everything else, right? And then you have to let nature take over for a couple of years as well. I mean, that can happen very quickly sometimes, but
it could take long too, right?
Recognize that for everything to fill in and look really, really great, it might take a year or two after that as well.
Because I'm curious, because I'm sure it's not going to be Photoshop beautified like in 1 year. That was my question. I'm, as a somewhat gardener, I know it takes time. You can't always, and you're working on windows, so you don't have all the time that some of the rest of us would have. So what would be the expectation?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have pretty comprehensive planting plans that have been developed, and there will be a very dense planting strategy. But, that being said, those plants do need some time to grow. They do need some time to spread and fill in the gaps. So, we'll have to let nature have that time to do that.
And the same thing with the turtles. It's going to take a while for them to get used to the new digs, right? I'm saying it in a nice way,
Sure. I mean, turtles, they go back to where they were born when they
So that's going to take some time as well.
They'll have to find the area as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So as a result of this, will the flow of water improve in that area? For recreational use, for swimmers, for canoers, for that, comes to the end of the, on the recreational part of the water.
Yeah, so, the flows there are very slow at the moment. The works that we're doing, based on our modeling, we expect that they'll improve the flows by about 300%. So, about 3 times as fast as they are now.
Oh, wow.
Which, sounds good. It's still going to be fairly slow, and that's just the nature of the environment that we're dealing with again. But, these are the steps that we could take that are going to increase that flow as much as possible, and we're hoping that's going to be enough just to keep that sediment moving through a little bit better.
So I would assume you're also going to be documenting all of these things to learn from, so then that will be your plan for follow-up in the future, so you won't have to start all back over again. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's it. We wanted to do something that was very comprehensive. Everything, all of the pieces of this puzzle are all interconnected and they all work off of each other. And one of the things that we will be doing is monitoring throughout the years. So making sure that everything is working as it should.
Yeah. And then I'm sure you might come up with some other ideas as well.
Right. I
Right?
mean, even during the construction period, we'll have our field monitor on site at all times, and Kipo has a relatively new web page and Facebook site, so he'll be taking pictures and videos and uploading them there throughout the project, so that everybody will be able to see all the key steps as we move forward. And then, as Lynn mentioned, the monitoring needs to be done. That's going to be done for at least a 10-year period afterwards. And so that's our opportunity to correct, if too many plants have died in an area, we can go back and get those replanted and make sure things are working as we expected them to.
And now this is another important question. Climate change and the effect on the environment, I'm very sure has a direct impact on some of this work that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge with climate change. I'm aware of another project that took place in Montreal recently, and then, they had done all this planting and all this great work, and then we had the really high water levels, right? This flooding again this year that washed a lot of it away. So, it really needs to be considered in everything you do these days. And
why I was asking is I was thinking I was going down, I guess, down to the marina and or maybe at baseball practice, and I couldn't believe in the month of May that the water level along the seaway was about this much from the top of the shore, and it was after the flooding period. So, you understand, living in the community, the flooding period, the time the high water, but I couldn't believe how high the water was when in the past, past several years, there were times when it was extremely low, even in the seaway.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that really low year, a number of years back, really, highlighted the problems that we're having in the bay. And now, I mean, the whole Great Lakes St. Lawrence system is kind of regulated too, right?
Yes.
So even from 2017, when we had the really high water at that time, they were holding back a lot of water at the Moses Saunders Dam in Cornwall. And so the level in Lake Ontario was also very high, and in fact it was still high compared to where it would normally be. So then we got all that additional water on top of it, and so they have to keep releasing water all through the season. So what would be more variable in the past, now they're able to hold back a bit more to cut off the flooding peak a little bit. But the trade-off is then you have to maintain those high flows throughout the year. So.
Does anything happen during the winter months, or that has no bearing on anything that's going to happen there? When the freeze over, or
in terms of the work that's going to take place in the field,
Yeah.
we're going to be spending the winter basically preparing for the next field season. So we're going to actually be going to out for tenders again as a separate project next year. So we'll be reviewing contractor proposals, securing a contractor,
Planning.
and all those good things.
It doesn't end. That's why, and I guess that was the part, because it's continuous in order to get this whole section of land and all of the habitats all up and functioning and being in a good thing, And I think one of the things we've come to see in this community is that the community really enjoys the space. People are enjoying what's happening in and around that area, and always have.
Yeah, I think it's gonna. We see people using the island more and more, the paths along either side, and I think this project, although people will see some impacts in their enjoyment of it over the next 2 years, I think the improvement in the long run is really going to be worth it.
So I'm going to ask this question for all the fishing people. With all these changes, will there be more fishing? No, just kidding. Or better fishing, should I say? I'm not
that's
sure.
The goal, to improve the habitat for the long run. You know, in the long term, we want to maintain that really great habitat that we have there instead of allowing it to continue to
just
deteriorate.
Erode, right?
Exactly.
Okay, that was good. I had to ask that question. It was on my list of questions here. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I don't know if there's any other parts of the project that you wanted to talk about.
I think just highlighting if people want to see what this project will look like, because it's hard to just hear about it on the radio, and
right.
So we have updated our website, and we've put a lot of images on there, some renderings of what certain parts could look like, and we're going to continue to add more as we get more.
Can you share with our listeners what the exact website is?
So it's www.KahnawakeTV.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, Patrick mentioned a Facebook page. What is that, so people know?
So we have a Facebook page now that we've had for a number of months, and so if you go on the Kahnawake Environment Protection Office Facebook page, you can like it, and then you'll receive the updates. We'll be posting, like Patrick mentioned, images of different parts of the project as we go along. We'll be, the person who's in the field is going to be, giving us feedback and information on a continual basis to make sure things are going properly. So just, if people want to see first off what the project could look like, to check out our website, and then look to our Facebook page for updates as the project moves along.
And because, once people start seeing people out there, the questions are going to come. So, we already are planting the seeds that it is going to come.
Yeah, I mean, we do plan on doing a lot of communications in the coming weeks and months, including an open house that we want to host on site in September, just before the works get underway. I did want to mention, too, that there will be opportunities for local contractors as part of the work. So, how that's going to work isn't exactly specified at this point, but just stay tuned. And, if anybody wants to give the office a call and just let them know that they're interested or have availability for that kind of work, the old-fashioned way to call the office at 450-635-0600. That works as well.
And your office is located where? I have to keep asking this.
We walked here, actually.
It's a nice little walk now.
Yeah.
But just in case people don't know.
Just between the arena and the PK station.
Yeah.
The little blue building, the downstairs part.
Yeah. So just in case people want to stop in and have questions, I think it's an important thing that everybody has an understanding that, it's going to be step by step, but eventually will turn into a spot that benefits the whole community. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind, and making sure that people get their information. Anything else, guys, you want to add? You have I'd say a whole minute left.
A whole minute.
Being generous with the radio time.
I think one of the things I'd just like to mention is, you have mentioned a few times, it's been 10 years.
Yeah, I can't help myself.
I understand that too, and it has been a long process for us. It did take us a long time to get where we are, and finally we're there. So we want to just mention to the community that we appreciate the patience that people have had. We've received a number of calls throughout the years, and we know that it has taken a lot of patience, and people have wanted to see a solution, but we're really glad to say that we're finally there, and we finally have a solution. And if people have ideas, feedback, questions, to give us a call, and we'd be happy to
and in
discuss
terms
that.
of the beach that was recommended, that's going to be one of the topics that's going to be further explored.
I mean, it's not something we had a chance to talk about.
Yeah, I'm just
today,
thinking now. I was just thinking beach.
Yeah, it is going to be part of the project, and just the exact location and some of the details we still want to discuss with the communities to make sure it's what they want to see there.
Because I honestly believe that that's always been a focal point of this community, has been the beach, Johnson's Beach. And, as a kid, I was used to go there, block off the road, and that was my area. And some people may not remember it, but
or Deers Beach.
Or
too,
Deers Beach was another one.
Spot.
It was like that was the big thing, and you don't hear that anymore. So maybe this might be an opportunity for us to take a look at it.
Yeah, to have another gathering place again for the community to enjoy.
So just one more time on your webpage and your telephone number in case people have questions from today's show.
So the website is www.KahnawakeTV.com. You could, on Facebook, you would look up Kahnawake Environment Protection Office and like the page to get the updates. And our phone number is 450-635-0600.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Patrick, for joining me today. I'm looking forward to it. I am probably going to stop by because I'm very interested in the work that you guys are doing.